He'd stood in for his mother once, but this was the first King's speech since 1950.
As the King and Queen drive past to the Palace of Westminster.
An innovation for the new reign, a portable handrail. And with the King and Queen both with trailing cloaks, they had to separate and use different doors to the Lords. There was what looked like a sigh, but then all emotion was contained, even as the King announced weakening the sort of climate change measures he'd often said were essential.
Legislation will be introduced to strengthen the United Kingdom's energy security and reduce reliance on volatile international energy markets and hostile foreign regimes.
North Sea oil and gas licences would be awarded on an annual basis under the Offshore Petroleum Licensing Bill, a clear attempt to create a dividing line with Labour. The King even had to read out the Tories' latest campaign slogan.
My government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better.
The Justice Secretary, returning the King's speech to his pouch, revived the tradition of walking backwards from the King. Alex Chalk told Tory MPs it might, after all, be his last chance to do so. Rishi Sunak's focus on law and order measures, one part of his plan to defy the opinion polls.
Change to keep our nation secure and our communities safe, with tougher sentences for criminals, more powers for the police and security services, and tough new action to clamp down on antisocial behaviour.
5 law and order bills include a bill bringing in those tougher sentences for the most serious offences, but it will also introduce a presumption that sentences under 12 months are not served in prison. The Criminal Justice Bill will include powers to send some prisoners in England and Wales to overseas jails, just as the prison system nears full capacity and breaking point.
The headlines are going to be around maintaining the narrative around being tough on crime, which is why it's being headlined in that way. But underneath, there will be the detail around the measures that are being taken to urgently curb the overcrowding in prisons. It's got to this crisis point, and without such measures, such as abolishing short sentences, we won't be able to address the overcrowding issue.
Plans pushed by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, to ban the use of tents by rough sleepers were left out of the King's speech. Her allies say she is getting very frustrated. The Labour leader attacked her description of some homeless as making a lifestyle choice. And he attacked her repeated language, calling pro-Palestinian protests hate marches.
We have a party so devoid of leadership, it is happy to follow a Home Secretary who describes homelessness as a lifestyle choice. And believes that the job of protecting us all from extremists, the most basic job of government, is legitimate terrain for her divisive brand of politics. Mr. Speaker, as Director of Public Prosecutions, I worked closely with the police and counter-terrorism forces. Their job is hard enough already without the Home Secretary using it as a platform for her own ambitions. So I say to the Prime Minister, think very carefully about what she is committing your government to do.
Sack her Labour MPs had called out. The Prime Minister focused on the measures he wanted noticed, including the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, restricting the sale of tobacco so children now 14 or younger will never be allowed to buy them. It'll be accompanied by some sort of crackdown on the sale of vapes to young people.
It is the most significant public health intervention by any government for generations. Historic change from a historic King's speech.
How the Supreme Court justices rule on the Rwanda deportation plan, already in law, could dominate the months ahead more than some of the new bills announced today. The King and Queen returned to their carriage for the journey back to Buckingham Palace. One small glitch in a flawless debut, they were backward facing and had to change seats. But the King had stayed inscrutable. Lifelong opinions now fully suppressed.
And Gary joins us now here in Westminster. Gary, what's been the reaction to this speech?
You could find some Rishi Sunak loyalists who are saying this proves what a steady, reliable Prime Minister he is, a world away from the chaos of last autumn under Liz Truss and all the rest of it. But you can also find quite a lot of Tory MPs, quite a lot of them with smaller majorities, who say they are underwhelmed. There is no retail offer here. One of them saying, does he know there's an election coming at all? You saw the tension play out there, or Keir Starmer was trying to draw your attention to the tension between Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak. They were sitting together looking like happy buddies, but you sense there is quite a lot of tension behind the scenes, and some of her allies are saying that she is getting very fed up. Quite where that goes will be an interesting one to watch as they try and work out what really goes into that criminal justice bill, a traditional sort of Christmas tree one on which you hang all sorts of things. Can she get her way, eventually trying to get some of her measures in there, like the measures on tents? Possibly not. Slight whiff of a rebellion potentially over one element in the King's speech, the idea that you don't need a warrant to do house searches, looking for iPhones you're pretty sure are inside a house. Some Tory MPs unhappy about that, but I think the overwhelming feeling you have is they don't have a sense of a big offer for the voters, but they also, a lot of Tory MPs saying they don't have a sense of who Rishi Sunak is. Keep being told there'll be a great reveal. It was going to be the conference speech. It was going to be the autumn statement. It'll be the reshuffle. It'll be in the King's speech. And they still feel they don't have a proper idea of a political shape and direction, and they sense they really need that.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, campaigners and senior politicians are angry that the government appears to have shelved long-promised legislation to modernise the Mental Health Act. They'd been calling for a new law to outlaw inappropriate detention of people with learning disabilities. A white paper was published nearly 3 years ago. Well, joining me to discuss this is our health and social care editor, Victoria MacDonald. Victoria.
Well, there was no mention of the reform to the Mental Health Act, Cathy, in the King's speech. And this is, as you said, long-awaited reform. This is 40-year-old legislation. And I think anybody in the mental health world would say it is desperately needing updating. And it was actually, in fact, consistently promised in Conservative Party manifestos, but it wasn't there today. So this is what the Centre for Mental Health said today, and it echoes what many other mental health organisations are saying. It is outdated, it is discriminatory, and it gives too little regard to people's rights and dignity. A modernised act, they said, could ensure people have better safeguards for their rights and dignity and more of a say in how they are treated. Now, one of the issues we have highlighted repeatedly on Channel 4 News is that under the current legislation, black people are 4 times more likely to be sectioned and 11 times more likely to be given a community treatment order when they leave hospital. And charities like mine, for instance, have long called for those treatment orders to be abolished because they don't reduce admissions. And yet, as I said, they disproportionately used against black people. But it looks very likely that this will now not happen in this Parliament, although the Department of Health and Social Care said that an inpatient and mental health facility deserves to receive safe, high-quality care and to be looked after with dignity and respect, and that they are committed to ensuring this happens.
And Victoria, another missing measure was the ban on conversion therapy. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, this was promised in 2018, but again now looks unlikely to become law before the next general election. Conversion therapy is the practice of trying to change or suppress someone's sexual orientation, making them not gay, in other words. Again, charities and campaigners describe the harm to LGBTQ plus people's mental health, and that under current legislation, they are not protected. Now, the government has said in the past that this is an abhorrent practice, but now they're saying that it is a complex issue which they are carefully considering.
Victoria, thanks very much. Well, joining me now is in the last hour, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has said he is not applying to the Home Secretary to have this Saturday's pro-Palestinian march banned. This despite public pressure from the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, who said the protest on Armistice Day would be provocative and disrespectful. After attending meetings in Whitehall this evening, the Commissioner said this.
The law is very clear. Parliament's laid out a framework which means if people want to assemble for a protest or any other reason, it will happen. So this weekend there will be a protest assembly because Parliament has said that can never be stopped. There may be marches, there may be other factors to consider. We can put tough conditions on this about where it's going to take place. The organisers aren't suggesting they're going to go near the Emirates events, but there will be a protest.
Well, let's discuss all of this now with the Prisons Minister, Damien Hinds. I want to come to the King's Speech, of course, in just a second, but just to get your response to what we've heard from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, that pro-Palestine march won't be banned. Has he made the right decision in your view?
Well, you've heard the Commissioner's statement there, and of course the police operate independently in this country, and that's quite right. What I would say is this one weekend, Armistice Day, Remembrance Sunday, is a unique weekend in our country, a very solemn time, a time when people reflect and remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice, actually so that we could have freedoms to march and so on. And there are many other weekends in the year when that is possible. So I just would appeal to people to think extremely carefully and to heed the request not to go ahead in that way.
You're happy that he can't ban a static march. He says that can't be banned.
So the police operate independently. That is a long-standing and correct principle in our country.
I wonder if your Home Secretary has got the message. But fewer bills. Let's come to the King's Speech, because there are fewer bills than any monarch's speech for almost a decade. Critics are saying you've run out of ideas, but maybe you're preparing for a spring election.
Actually, I mean, the number of bills in the King's Speech is not atypical. But in any case, I don't think it's the right way to judge a legislative programme by the sheer number of pieces of legislation. Look, this is a King's Speech programme for the long term. It's taking important long-term decisions for our future on things like energy security, on things like the Advanced British Standard, on things like having future generations of children growing up smoke-free. These are really important legislative priorities to complement the focus on delivery that we have right now.
Right, and on your patch, Law and Order, you're talking tough on rapists getting longer sentences, for example, but you don't have the prison places to deliver on those promises you're trying to make.
Well, look, we will always make sure we have the prison places we need to make sure that dangerous people are locked up. And,
well, you're 20,000 fewer than you promised. Well, they won't come on stream until 2030.
No, that's not correct. We are adding prison places all the time. We've added 5,000 actually in the last year alone.
And, yes, but you promised 20,000 by the mid-2020s. They're not going to come on stream until 2030. It was on the government website, so look, your own departmental website.
We are continuing that programme. We've got 2 prisons have opened at Five Wells and Fosse Way, brand new modern prisons with the sort of facilities that help to get people into work and give them education and get them rehabilitated. There's another one under construction. We're adding lots more capacity elsewhere as well. But I just wanted to say, look, ever since 2010, we have rightly been tough on crime, on law and order, making sure that those who commit the worst offences go to prison for longer. Our average prison sentences are up markedly since 2010.
Right. So how many extra prison places will be required to deliver these measures that you've set out today?
Well, look, we're doing these things because they're the right thing to do, rather than because of some sort of accounting calculation. We will make sure that the prison places that are needed are there.
Yeah, but how many will be needed? And by the way, must have done that calculation before coming up with these plans.
And by the way, I mean, where people are better rehabilitated not in prison, that happens, that is the case too often. People on short sentences where it makes more sense to make sure they get off their drugs, again, the habit of work. That's also part of it. But then we need to make sure, and we will make sure the places are there so the people who have committed the worst offences, the most dangerous people, can always be housed in prison.
So these promises that you've made today, these laws that you're going to introduce, how many more prison places will be required?
So, I mean, I can't predict exactly in the future. We want fewer people to commit crimes. Crimes have come down since 2010 quite markedly. If you look at things like domestic burglary, violent crimes, criminal damage, I want that trend to continue. But as I say, we will make sure the places are there. And by the way, we've also committed capital spending and so on to make sure that we can provide those places as needed.
Well, you talked about the lower sentences, presumption against jail terms under 12 months. About 11,000 men convicted of stalking or harassment were jailed for 12 months or less. Would they in future then miss a custodial sentence?
Well, Cathy, look, we have done a lot to reform the whole framework around offences like stalking and others connected with domestic abuse, controlling and coercive behaviour and so on, economic domestic abuse as well. And rightly, society has much more of a focus on this than in the past. Let me be clear, we are not banning short sentences. It's about a presumption, but the...
Right, so you'd expect someone who's been
option
convicted of harassment or stalking would be jailed or wouldn't be jailed?
So that's a decision that judges make. It's not a decision that politicians make in the case of an individual. That's the way it should be. What we're saying is that where it makes more sense to put someone on a suspended sentence order, which basically means if they maintain good behaviour, then the prison sentence still hangs over them but doesn't get enacted until that time. Quite often need to do other things like get off alcohol, get off drugs, sometimes stay away from particular areas. For some people that works better. But there will always be people, Kathy, for whom that custodial sentence is the right thing to do.
But in the last year, 11,000 men were convicted of stalking and harassment and they were sentenced to 12 months or less. They would avoid jail under your presumption. Are you happy with that?
No, not necessarily. It will remain for a judge to decide.
Yeah, but the judge did decide that in 11,000 cases.
And the judge could still decide. It will depend on the individual case. But it's right that we have judicial independence in that way. What we want to make sure.
You've given them a steer, haven't you, with that presumption, and the logical consequence of that will be that men who've been convicted of those kind of crimes, who would potentially have been jailed, won't be jailed.
Well, what we want to make sure is that where it is more appropriate to not have someone in prison, that the best systems, the best equipment, the best processes, the best supervision is there. So our technology, for example, now someone has to be able to track where someone has gone to make sure they are not going near somebody who they shouldn't go near. That is the sort of technology that we didn't have a number of years ago. But just to repeat, we're not banning short sentences. There will always be cases. There will always be cases where that's the right thing to do.
Are you still planning to legislate to ban charities distributing tents to the homeless? Is that something you'd still like to do in your department?
So look, if you want to see what the government's programme is on addressing homelessness and rough sleeping specifically, you can see it in our plan published around a year ago to end rough sleeping for good. And that involves, there are many different aspects to that in my world, in the prisons world, prison leavers. We're spending a lot of money to make sure there is first night and follow-on accommodation for people leaving prisons. We're ending Friday releases.
I'm very familiar with your policy in this area.
Going on with people in the armed forces.
But the Home Secretary tweeted that she wanted to ban charities distributing tents to homeless people. Are you still planning to legislate on that or not?
So I don't have an announcement to make on that.
You're still having a row?
I don't have an announcement to make on that today. What I would say is that homelessness, and particularly street homelessness, rough sleeping, is a very complex issue that involves people in very complex circumstances, often with addictions, and we're also putting a lot of effort in and a lot of financial investment in to helping to address those root causes. And ultimately, we want to be offering people accommodation, hostel accommodation, preferably more permanent accommodation. That is the best. That really is the best outcome for them.
But it seems clear to me you don't agree with your boss.
For society.
You don't agree with your boss, and what's more, her boss doesn't seem to agree with her. So why doesn't he sack her? Is he too weak to sack her?
Look, we all agree about the imperative of eliminating street homelessness. That's what we all want to do. And as I say, look, it is invariably better to be in hostel accommodation, and even better still to be in stable, longer-term accommodation.
Is he too weak to sack her?
Than to be on the street. And when
is he too weak to sack her?
When that help is offered, when those services are offered, they should be taken up, because it is by far the better outcome.
I'm hearing you, but is he too weak to sack her?
Look, what I want to talk about is about homelessness and our united approach as a government.
Okay.
Large sums of money going into this area, and it is having an effect. We've seen the numbers come down off the peak. They're still higher than we would like, and that's why we said we want to end it for good, and that is what we're all united behind.
Damian Hinds, I introduced you, of course, Suella Braverman. It isn't your boss, Alex Chalk is, but thank you very much for joining us. Well, now, many view the King's speech as Rishi Sunak's chance to try and show voters the clear difference between him and the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Well, let's turn now to the Shadow Digital Culture, Media and Sports Secretary, Thangam Debonair. Thangam, law and order, right at the heart of the King's speech. Clear question, do you in Labour support a presumption against sentences of less than 12 months or not?
Well, I think what we support is a strong criminal justice system, Cathy, and that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is basically something that is analogous to a rudderless ship, in which, as you've just said, we have a Home Secretary who says one thing on Twitter, and then we have a Prime Minister who doesn't seem to back her and is giving no clear steer to which way the ship is going. I think that's really unfortunate.
Out of Damon Hines, but I want you to answer that question I just asked. Does Labour support a presumption against sentences of less than 12 months or not?
We support having a separation of powers between Parliament, which sets the laws, and a criminal justice which interprets the laws, and that's the right thing to do. I want the court system to be strong again after 13 years of decline under these successive Tory governments. We've had prisons that have basically been melting down. We have prison funding that's been committed that they haven't spent or got out of the door, so I don't quite know how they're going to meet their obligations.
Sentences for 6 months and less. Why not do the same for 12 months or less?
Well, I think it's really important that what we're looking at here is a Tory government that isn't tackling crime, that hasn't sent perpetrators to prison when they should have been sent to prison. We have been calling for longer sentences for some time now, Cathy, and it's about time the Tory government got up to speed with this.
Serious violent crimes. Yes. So does that mean that Labour will send more people to jail than the Tories potentially?
It means that Labour will put more police back on the streets. We want to see safe town centres. We want to get rid of the scourge of drug dealers that are terrorising neighbourhoods. And we know, because people are telling us this, that after 13 years where police officer numbers have been successively cut and cut, the single best thing we can do to begin with is to put 13,500 police officers back on our streets, into our town centres.
I'm sure it'll be a land of milk and honey, but are you going to be jailing more people than the Tories or less people than the Tories?
We hope that there will be less crime by having better policing, better prevention measures, and more people able to feel that there's a police officer on their streets that they can talk to.
So you're not going to need the extra 20,000 places that the Tories are coming on stream by 2030?
Well, goodness knows what's going to happen over the next 12 months before we get a general election. I would really like it to be sooner than that, in which case we'll be in control sooner than that. Okay. But at the moment, here they are. As you've seen, they don't seem to have a clear sense of direction. There's a weak Prime Minister in charge of a weak government who can't even get his own Home Secretary to agree with him on anything.
But do you support those extra jail places or not? 20,000 in the pipeline. You might be in power in a few months' time. You've got to decide whether to scrap those places or not.
We want serious criminals to go to prison, absolutely. But we also want
more prison places.
More criminals to be caught at an earlier stage. We want more crime to be prevented. And the way to do that is better neighbourhood policing, which under the Tories has been successively cut and cut.
I mean, you've criticised this thin programme from the Conservative government, but few voters know that you have 5 missions, let alone what they are. Your programme's pretty thin as well, isn't it?
Well, I think having 5 missions, which are clear, bold visions for the future, contrasts 13 years of decline, which we've had under successive Tory Prime Ministers, with a decade of national renewal. A decade of national renewal, which includes taking back control of our streets, as I've explained, with more police officers in our town centres and police hubs in every neighbourhood. It includes getting to net zero by 2030 on energy. Now, I heard nothing today in the King's speech about climate change, one of the biggest clear and present dangers that threaten our existence. Nothing. We know that we need to get there. Now, that's 2 missions. I could go through the other 3 if you'd like me to.
Well, unfortunately, we have limited time, but I'm glad you memorised them. That's very impressive. I mean, the last policy speech that Sir Keir Starmer gave was completely overshadowed by this huge row over his policy towards Israel and his refusal to push for a ceasefire. I mean, are you concerned that you're at risk of hemorrhaging support in areas with a lot of Muslim voters?
I know that the vision we all share as we watch night after night the horrifying images from Gaza and also the horrifying scenes that we saw on October the 7th and since the attacks on Israeli citizens by the terrorist organisation Hamas. We all want peace in the region, and the Labour Party has long called for a solution which is actually about having Palestine and Israel living side by side as peaceful states. Now, we need to get to that stage. We're not there at the moment, clearly. And in order to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, which we obviously badly need, and medical supplies and water, we are going to need pauses in the fighting. We are focused on what is practical and doable right now.
There's going to be a vote potentially in the Commons on a ceasefire. You'd be happy voting against a ceasefire, and all your shadow cabinet colleagues?
What I want to see is peace in the region, and I think that
against a ceasefire.
Well, we're yet to see any amendment, so we don't know what vote there would be. I think it's important that we're focused on what is doable. Now, Lisa Nandy, our Shadow International Development Secretary, went to the region last week. She's got a background in NGO work, and she was able to talk to NGOs and officials about getting more aid, medical supplies and so on into Gaza. There isn't enough yet. We know there needs to be a pause in fighting to allow that. That's what we need right now. It's something that would help the Palestinian people right now, and beyond beyond that, we need to see a political solution, because there has to be politics in this eventually. There has to be dialogue. To get there will take several stages, but our vision is for a peaceful Palestine living side by side with a peaceful Israel. That's a vision worth campaigning for, and that's the campaign that we have been calling for some time.
Fangam Devonair, thanks very much. Well, it is the last King's speech before the next general election, which polls suggest the Conservatives are on course to lose. But is it likely to change anyone's minds? Our senior political correspondent Paul McNamara looks at how the King's speech has gone down in two marginal constituencies, Stevenage and Mansfield.
Ford hopes this will be the car which revives flagging fortunes.
It wasn't just Ford's fortunes restored. The Mondeo, and its owners to be precise, were seen as crucial in helping restore the Labour Party into government, and what they thought could shift policy.
The Mondeo man is going to get upset if his journey increases 70% more.
Now, it's not Mondeo man election gurus want to woo, it's Lara. Stevenage woman will decide the next election, according to some election experts. Works full-time, early 40s, has children and disillusioned with politics. So did the King's speech turn dyed heads here?
Forcing criminals to attend their sentencing hearings. Like the sound of that one?
Yep.
OK. A plan to raise the smoking age gradually, so today's 14-year-olds will never be able to legally smoke.
Yep, I like that one. I've got a 13-year-old, so yeah.
OK, that was good with you. Legislation around regulations for English football. I don't know what those ones are.
I've not got a clue.
Do you care about football?
No.
The cost of living crisis is biting hard. Lara voted Conservative in 2019, but right now she says her vote is up for grabs. And today has not changed that.
In general, how do you feel about state of the nation? Are you happy with how the government's doing?
Yeah, it's scary. I worry about my children. Like my 16-year-old, for her trying to get a job right now she's really, really struggling. So just she wants to earn a little bit of money.
Do you have faith that Rishi Sunak could be the man to make it easier for your 16-year-old daughter to get a job?
I hope so, but at the moment I'm not sure.
Only 2 out of 21 laws announced today concern the environment. At the Hertfordshire Climate Change and Sustainability Partnership annual meeting, it didn't go unnoticed.
I just don't think they'll get back in. I think that's hugely disappointing. I think they're missing a trick, actually. So for me, it's a big letdown.
We'd heard before that there was going to be some licensing for oil exploration and gas, so I'm not totally surprised. I understand the energy security element, and if we're actually importing at the moment, then it kind of makes sense to produce our own.
Stevenage has always voted in an MP from the governing party, so a win here is seen as pretty much imperative to whoever wins the next general election. There is, though, another key group of seats, those so-called red wall seats, places that traditionally vote Labour but which went Conservative in 2019. Now, in truth, a lot of those MPs think their jobs are beyond saving, but if there is any way for them to cling on, the fight back needs to start now.
At this toddler and parents group in Mansfield, all isn't lost yet for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, we like Rishi Sunak. We think he's got absolutely amazing views, doing right by our country at the moment.
I'm not going to vote any party this time.
If I'm going to vote for Labour again, because I didn't vote last time, then they've got to show me a little bit more than probably what they're doing now.
The Conservatives haven't lost the red wall, Stevenage and other parts of the UK yet, but Labour hasn't won them either.